Some of the most critical issues before the country will now be decided in the next few weeks and months by India's Supreme Court. And Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. Before we introduce our newsmaker today, top lawyer Dushyant Dave, let's take a look at some of the key issues that are before the Supreme Court. As sedition gets put on hold, will the Supreme Court go the whole way? Remember, this is only an interim pause. Then there's the question of what's being called bulldozer justice, bulldozers being brought into areas where so-called riot accused are facing their homes and places of employment coming under JCBs. Then there is the Supreme Court having to handle the question of marital rape after the Delhi High Court delivered a split verdict on it. And of course, there's the thorny issues of the Uniform Civil Code as well as the abrogation of Article 370. All of this at a time when Minister Kiran Rijiju is talking about a Lakshman Rekha, seeming to imply that the Supreme Court is exceeding its mandate. Those comments were made in the context of the sedition case. We're very pleased to have with us on the program today Dushyant Dave. Dushyant Dave is, of course, one of our foremost legal minds. He's a senior advocate and he has been the face of so many, I would say, issues of justice for ordinary people in the highest court of the land. Dushyant, welcome to the program. And I want to start with something I think that the Supreme Court and the authorities really seem to have taken you seriously on. And that is when you told the court, why are the bulldozers only being used against India's poor? Why don't you send them into posh localities as well? So the issue one that we'd like you to talk about is what's being called the bulldozer concept of justice, from bulldozer Baba Yogi Adityanath, bulldozer Mama Shivraj Singh Chauhan, to now a general application of the bulldozer as an instrument of justice. Mr. Dave, I'd like your first comments on this and how you see the fact that bulldozers have now been sent into very posh localities of the capital as well after your comments.
Well, first and foremost, let me say one thing, that I do not support illegal encroachments, nor do I support unauthorized constructions. I'm very conscious of that. So having said that, I must say that the municipal authorities certainly have the power to remove the encroachments from public lands or to regularize unauthorized constructions. That's nothing wrong about that. But having said that, what is really troublesome is the usage of this power of demolition by using bulldozers into areas where some kind of public disturbance has taken place between the two communities. Now, if you are going to therefore go into the riot affected areas and touch upon mostly the residential premises or the business establishments of people belonging to a particular community and demolish them without issuing any notice, without there being any finding as to illegal encroachment, without there being any finding as to unauthorized construction, and much more without there being any judicial finding that the person whose house or business you are destroying was actually involved in rioting. Now, if this be the position, then I think this is completely unacceptable. It's unconstitutional. It is against very basic human values that this country stands for. So I think to that extent, these kind of demolitions are completely unjustified, and I condemn them very strongly.
And you were able to sort of secure a halt from the Supreme Court, and despite that, at least for a period of time, the demolitions continue to take place in the capital's Jahangirpuri area. There has also been a countering of the fact that only Muslims, religious minorities, are being targeted by the government. Do you believe that the bulldozer is being used as an instrument against India's religious minorities, or do you believe that this is actually a kind of vigilante form of justice that governments are now falling back on?
See, either way, it is bad. Take for example Jahangirpuri. As far as I know facts, and I don't know too many facts, but it does appear that Vishwa Hindu Parishad wanted to take out a procession. They sought permission from the police. Police denied it, saying that it's a sensitive area, we won't. They still carried out with the procession, and ultimately it led to skirmishes. Now, this is bound to happen when both sides, use provocative, statements against each other and against religion of each other. And then some youth start pelting stones, and that in that melee, nobody knows actually who has caused this riot. Nobody knows who participated in them. So in a situation like that, even if these persons who participated in riot are ultimately convicted, the Indian Penal Code does not provide punishment that their homes and business establishments will be demolished. At the most, they can be imprisoned. So I think, or fined. So I think that, there is no doubt in my mind that the usage in recent times in in Madhya Pradesh, in Gujarat and Delhi, in relation to the riot affected areas, was definitely targeted against the minority community. And that is really, I would say, it's a matter of great sadness for people who love this country, who love the constitution and the rule of law.
What do you now hope the Supreme Court will do? You were managed to get temporary reprieve, but what happens next? Is this something that is within the court's jurisdiction? Because the court already has stipulated guidelines in the past about notices being given, about enough, people having enough time to respond to them, and so on. Given that the bulldozers have now been taken into posh localities where not only Muslims live, but there is mixed population, what is the case that you will now make in court when you appear next?
Well, I wouldn't like to talk about the case because I generally don't discuss the case that I am appearing. But I'm sure this is a justiciable issue, and I'm sure the highest court of the country should decide this, because this is about right to life. This is about rule of law. This is about constitutional morality. So I think it's far too important for a country like this, where the highest court has to really, decide these issues. And I'm sure the Supreme Court will, decide this issue. It will accept the challenge and go into it.
One final question on the concept of bulldozer justice before we move on to the next issue before the courts. And the bulldozer is a metaphor, for politicians, especially in Uttar Pradesh, now in Madhya Pradesh, and some would say now even in Delhi. The bulldozer has become a metaphor for tough governance, for reforming and controlling criminals, for effective law and order. One of the reasons that was cited for Yogi Adityanath's win. For you, as a legal mind, as a civil rights activist, what is this bulldozer a metaphor for?
Look, we must understand that India has a history of a unimaginable culture behind us. It has a great history of liberalism. It has a great history about respecting human values and human rights, even much before, these human rights and fundamental rights were incorporated in the constitution by the constitutional framers. This country has been an extraordinarily, governed country by rule of law. And this kind of, for example, if a Muslim boy runs away with a Hindu girl, the father files a complaint, police goes and demolishes the house of the father and the shop of the father. Now, that's not the kind of justice this country is proud of. We have condemned Sharia for the very reason that law, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, is not something that Hindu culture even permits. So I think Indian culture is far too, I would say sober, far too magnanimous than, allow these kind of nonsensical approaches. I think this is really not acceptable, and I hope sooner those in power realize, the better it is. Because we must understand one thing, that you cannot rule by fear for a long time. And if you have to rule the country by fear, then you are not governing the country.
You mentioned the Sharia law, and you said that India civilizationally does not believe in that kind of culture, and you're right. But there is a clamor now for a uniform civil code, and the Supreme Court at different instances, as you know, and let's bring that up as our second issue, the uniform civil code. There are several states, Mr. Dave, that are now talking about bringing in their own law. We've seen this statement coming from Uttarakhand. We have seen this statement coming from Uttar Pradesh, to name just two. Goa has been called a shining example by the Supreme Court itself in observations. The Supreme Court at several stages has backed the idea of a uniform civil code, as does our constitution. But the critics say that this is not the mahal, this is not the environment at a time when religious minorities seem to be at the receiving end of a kind of dominant narrative. What would you say?
Let's understand one thing. We have a history. We have a history of thousands of years. Before the Muslims came, there were Buddhists, there were Jains, and Hinduism still survived, and survived brilliantly. And yes, at some point of time, some emperor, even a Hindu emperor, may have discriminated against the Hindus. For example, Ashoka went after the Brahmins after he adopted Buddhism. Now, that kind of a situation in a modern democracy is unthinkable. Yes, if you want to bring a civil court, you must have a national consensus about it. And that's precisely the reason why during the Constituent Assembly, even Dr. Ambedkar said, because, Article 44, which, says directive principle of the state policy, which says that state shall endeavor to bring about a common civil code. And I quote Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, where he said, I quite realize their feelings in the matter, but I think they have read rather too much into Article 35, which is 44 now, which merely proposes that the state shall endeavor to secure a civil code for the citizens of the country. Now, the word endeavor is very important. Undoubtedly, there are many aspects of personal laws which may not be good for a democracy. I agree to that. It may not be in consonance with the fundamental rights, especially when it comes to women. So
Yes.
there may be necessity for reformation, but that reformation must come after consensus. Even the Law Commission, which was last appointed, I think in 2016, the Law Commission said, and I quote, I think they said it's neither necessary nor
Yeah.
desirable at this stage in the country that we should have common civil code. And it said that unified nation does not necessarily need to have uniformity. So this is
Yeah.
something which we must understand. We must strive to persuade people to the good of the proposed civil code without having creating a fear amongst minorities that we are going to interfere with their personal rights or their religious rights.
So, do I hear you say that while you approve of the principle, you do not think the timing is right and it cannot be bulldozed, as it were, into the country?
Yes, absolutely. Even if we bring it, we must bring it in stages, and we must bring it, to the extent it's necessary. So, for example, protection to women. I mean, triple talaq is something which is really not acceptable. So, I mean, the Supreme Court was right in striking it down. So that kind of a situation should be brought about. There may be many issues on which there are many issues. Take, for example, even under Hindu law, our women have been and girls have been given equal right in ancestral property. How many parents or brothers give their sisters or daughters equal right in their property? I mean, hardly 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
So these are issues which have to be taken to the community, to the society, and society's leaders, political, religious, and civil leaders. They all must persuade to bring about some kind of an understanding of these issues.
On a point of law, last question on this subject. The states that are talking about bringing in their own legislations, the Supreme Court citing the example of Goa, legally speaking, is this tenable that if there is no, let's say, central uniform civil code, but different states have their own uniform civil code, does that legally hold?
Well, I would say that and powers under the concurrent list of the seventh schedule of the Constitution may give states some discretion in this, and I don't think one can really grudge about it, so long as they don't conflict directly with the central laws, and presidential assent has been obtained under Article 254. So it may be possible, and but ultimately these are issues which will have to be tested before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court should consider them as quickly as possible rather than put them onto back burner.
Which is where they've been for years. Let's go on to something that the Supreme Court has not put on the back burner: sedition. That's our issue number 3, one of the most sort of imperative subjects before the court. The Chief Justice has, in fact, put this law in abeyance. Now, it seemed at first, Mr. Dave, that the government was on board with this. The government too wanted a review of this law. But since then, we have seen a kind of ambiguous statement from the minister talking about a Lakshman Rekha that needs to be respected, suggesting that the government believes the court overreached in putting this law in abeyance. Your remarks, sir?
Well, I think the court's intervention is fully justified. There is no doubt about it. Considering that, the kind of abuse which we have witnessed, it's not just the BJP government. BJP government has increased it much more. Even during the Congress government, the use of sedition against innocent persons was quite prevalent. And therefore, all those people in power, they like to, harass people who are, who speak up against them, or, social activists or Dalit activists. These are the powers which every government, I think, likes and enjoys and abuses. So the power of 124A, frankly, it's an antiquated law. It is not a law which really has a place in a modern democracy. Because I don't think when people criticize the government, people speak against the government, something seditious takes place, unless of course some kind of a violence takes place following that. So really speaking, the Supreme Court has done, which is something extraordinary. It is remarkable because it is unthinkable that it could have put a stay like this. But perhaps the Supreme Court is now taking judicial notice of the gross abuse of this power in recent years. And therefore, the Supreme Court perhaps taking advantage of the affidavit filed by the government itself, because the government said in its affidavit that Government of India being fully cognizant of various views being expressed on the subject of sedition, and also having considered the concern of civil liberties and human rights, while committed to maintain and protect sovereignty and integrity, has decided to re-examine. Now,
Yeah.
therefore, the government itself in its affidavit acknowledged that there is serious issue about violation of human rights, and therefore government perhaps wants to reconsider. Supreme Court's order perhaps will help the government, to reach the right conclusion. So I think I would say it's a historic moment in the history of the Supreme Court, and citizens of this country would be eternally grateful to the Supreme Court for what it has done yesterday.
What did you make of the comment on the Lakshman Rekha? Perhaps the government wanted to review the law without actually getting rid of it, and perhaps there is some concern that the Supreme Court is moving in the direction of actually reading this law down, as was done with triple talaq.
Well, I mean, the government of the day should not be happy when Supreme Court strikes down triple talaq, and when it wants to strike down sedition, it suddenly becomes unhappy with the Supreme Court. Lakshman Rekha is for everything. The Supreme Court then allegedly crossed Lakshman Rekha, or according to government, it has crossed now. To my mind, Supreme Court has not, crossed any Lakshman Rekha. It's the ultimate custodian of the fundamental rights of citizens. As part of its duty, it's a pious duty. The Supreme Court has to therefore, consider from time to time as to what is good for the citizens of the country. When it decides that, it's not bothered about what the executive thinks and what executive wants to do. So court takes a larger view of the constitution, the basic human values, the basic fundamental rights, and the abuse that takes place.
There
So
are those who have argued, Mr. Dave, that this is something that should have come from Parliament and not from the court. Do you agree?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. In fact, I am astonished. If this is a government which can bring farm laws without any debate and repeal the farm laws without any debate. If it was serious about removing sedition, it could have done it within a day or two. So I sometimes wonder what government really wants. I mean, if the government is holding out a promise to the nation that we are reconsidering, what prevented government from acting with alacrity as it does in many cases? For example, the Delhi's 3 municipal corporation elections, they deferred by saying that we are going to unify them, brought the law in just a week or so. So I don't think Parliament alone has in fact, Supreme Court has a much greater duty and responsibility under the Constitution to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens.
You make the interesting point that when the Lakshman Rekha was not invoked during the triple talaq, why invoke it now? Another time when it has not been invoked is on the issue of marital rape. When a few years ago during the UPA government, in fact, Parliament unanimously agreed to not legislate on this. And that's our next issue that is now going to be before the Supreme Court, Mr. Dave, as you know, with a very contentious Delhi High Court division. One judge even suggesting that a woman being assaulted by her husband is different from a woman being, from this feeling she would have on being assaulted by a stranger. This matter now to the Supreme Court. How do you see this issue that Parliament, by the way, had the opportunity to legislate on and missed that opportunity?
Well, I'm not really sure whether, at this stage, there is no doubt about the fact that dignity and respect for a woman, even if she is a wife, has to be maintained. I mean, it cannot be compromised under any circumstances. A married man he doesn't, own his wife. She's not a chattel for him. So he has to respect her basic values. And therefore, a part of that basic value, if a woman is being forced into sex, perhaps it's not desirable, it's not good. But it would be very difficult for anyone to say that it amounts to rape. There are many other provisions in the Indian Penal Code, like force, assault, and there are express provisions in the penal code where they have said that perhaps assaulting a woman may amount to a very grave offense. So I think these are issues on which I am very I would say sanguine about, because this is also a social issue in this country. We are a feudal society still. And we are a man-dominated society, unfortunately, which has to be changed. But the change must come about by consensus, by persuasion, by education. And
Though, that's what we said about
of
decriminalizing
course,
homosexuality. That's what we said about dowry. That's what we said about sati. That's what we said. Sometimes the law needs to be ahead of the societal change to give the cover to those who
so
dare
there are,
to push
I'll tell
that
you,
change and lead that change.
I'll tell you, there are two specific provisions. For example, there is sexual harassment and punishment for sexual harassment, which is section 354A in the Indian Penal Code. And there is assault or use of criminal force to a woman with intent to disrobe. That's under 354B. Now, these are in addition to assault, and force which can be used against women. So I think there are enough provisions under the Indian Penal Code to take action against a husband in case he misconducts himself. But rape is difficult, and the exception which has been expressly provided in the statute perhaps may come in the way of deciding that rape actually there can be a marital rape. So it's something which a nation must debate. I would say
I have, yeah.
this is a fit case where all political parties must put their heads together and decide.
The last time they did that, they declined to legislate on it. I have to agree to I agree with a lot of things you say on this one. I will express my disagreement, but let's go to the last issue. The last issue is on the abrogation of Article 370. There's a bunch of petitions before the court. The Supreme Court will be hearing these cases right after its summer break. Mr. Dave, it seems to me that this is the delay in itself makes these petitions somewhat redundant, that we are never going to actually see a reversal of what happened invoking a point of law. I don't know if you agree.
No, I definitely feel that the Supreme Court hasn't done itself a great service or credit by not hearing important cases like challenge to scrapping of 370, or challenge to Citizenship Amendment Act, or even challenge to this love jihad laws, etc. I think these are issues where Supreme Court should have taken up the matters with far more alacrity than what it has. And I had hoped, with great respect, in fact, Chief Justice Ramna has really done great service to the country in many matters. I mean, his approach has been outstanding, considering that his four predecessors failed the country miserably. So
those are strong words. You're saying the four previous Chief Justices failed India.
Yes, miserably, not just failed, miserably. So I feel that Chief Justice Ramna must take this opportunity to really show to the country that he really means to do something for the ultimately, people of Kashmir are also Indians. They are citizens of India. If they have a grievance about certain, a law passed by the parliament, they are entitled to challenge it, and their challenge must be heard as quickly as possible. And if the Supreme Court once and for decides one way or the other, the controversy can be put to rest. What's the point of allowing situation to linger where we are spending thousands of crores of rupees in Kashmir? Our armed forces are present there in lakhs of numbers, and both sides are losing important lives.
You seem to be suggesting the delay in hearing these petitions was conscious by the Supreme Court prior to Chief Justice Ramana.
I won't say conscious, but I would certainly say that Supreme Court hasn't done a great service to itself by deferring these cases.
All right, before I go, we've spoken about, you said that the four prior Chief Justices failed India miserably. They should have heard a petition on 370 much sooner. I have to get your comment juxtaposing this with the fact that the Allahabad High Court actually wasted time, the country's time, hearing a petition on the Taj Mahal. I would have never thought that I would see this day, but this happened. The court was not very endorsing of the petitioner, but that it was heard at all. Does that surprise you?
No, I don't know. I'm really sad at these kind of demands which are being made from time to time. I think someday somebody will say, why not start with Red Fort, which is really the pillar of our democracy today? Because on every 15th August, the Prime Minister makes starting from 1947 till today, the Prime Minister makes a statement about democracy from there on the ramparts of Red Fort. So somebody may tomorrow say that under Red Fort also there was a temple, and there are avshesh of some murtis there. I mean, we have to forget the past. The Mughals and the Islamic invaders, we condemn them as being barbaric. We don't want us a present generation or our democracy to be written 500 years down the road, that this democracy was also barbaric. We don't want that kind of a tag. So we should really forget what has happened in the past and move on. And I mean, look at Taj. It's a beautiful monument of architecture. The world appreciates it. I mean, for them to make these kind of demands, and I mean, court should have, you're right, thrown it off in half a second. But
Yeah.
Courts are sometimes, also carried away by these kind of emotive issues, and which really doesn't reflect well on us.
Well, there'll be a lot to unpack, Mr. Dave, when the court convenes again after the summer break. Some of you are lucky to get that break. The rest of us will soldier on through this heat. Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you with us, and we
Thank you
hope
very
to hear
much.
from you much more often. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.